underrated albums of 2019 and overlooked albums too. You know how it is every year, there's always those albums that kind of just slip under the radar, don't really get that much attention, probably deserve more than they get. And with the addition to my Undiscovered Gems series that I've started this year, which I've been really happy about, and the response has been great too, and I love doing those videos, it only makes sense for me to highlight even more albums throughout the course of the year that have sort of not really gained that much traction. So this year I'm going to be doing a two-part video to this, just to highlight even more albums than I usually do, and I'm just going to skip the overrated albums list. You know, they're kind of fun, but it kind of feels a bit petty talking about overrated albums. You know, you could probably guess without me even doing the video anyway which ones I would put on the list. If you've been subscribed to the channel for a while, I'm pretty sure you'd know which ones would make it. But anyway, this is about the overlooked albums, the underrated ones, the ones that deserve more attention, the ones that could appeal to a lot of people if they were aware of the album in the first place. And that really perfectly depicts my first choice here, and that is Hatchie's album from this year. What a debut album this is. This is genuinely one of my favourite pop releases of the year. I even said in my review that it's definitely not the most original thing you'll hear this year, which I think put off a few people leading up to this album. I remember seeing a couple of opinions about this just not really being original enough for people to go back to it. Some people even thinking it was very close to just almost ripping off certain acts from the past in the dream pop shoegaze type realm. And while I'm not the biggest fan of that genre as a whole, although dream pop and shoegaze kind of are separate even though they fall into a similar category, I just feel like Hatchie is honestly doing it a lot better than a lot of acts are around, to be honest. It's obviously inspired by Cock Twins. You know, you don't have to tell me that. I can recognize that while still liking the album, but it's not like that close to it where it puts me off instantaneously. I don't know. I just seem to get a lot of enjoyment out of this, even more so than some of the things that she is clearly inspired by. And that doesn't stop people from loving acts like Tame Impala for the past 10 years who are just not original at all, and yet they get all the hype from the critics, they get all the fans, you know, loving Tame Impala, the huge fan base that it has, even though it's just revival music. So why can't you like this? Why can't you like this? But the songs themselves are incredibly lush. I think the refrains and the hooks on this thing are just gorgeous. Like, I love her voice. I love the way it's just like all cushioned together in this really, really sugary coat. And you even have tracks like Stay With Me, which really don't even fit anything I've just said about how it's influenced by all the other things. Because this is just an original 2019 pop track. I think there aren't really any tracks around that really sound like this, and it's easily one of the best songs of the year. Shortparis are next on the list. This is an industrial rock synth punk band from Russia. Found this album through the Quietest list that was released not too long ago, and yeah, this is some really good shit. As of recording this video right now, not necessarily from when it's going to be released, but I haven't actually done a review for this album, and I'm thinking of doing it. We'll see if I get the time, because I do think it is actually really quite good. And yeah, I think just the real sheer force of the tracks and the very commanding vocals are just enough to lure you in, especially if you're a big fan of that industrial rock type stuff. Of course, with it being from Russia, it's gonna just, you know, be overlooked just by that metric alone, because, you know, Russian music is never talked about. There's literally no Russian bands that ever get talked about amongst music critics and stuff like that. But I still think it's absolutely worth your time if you're into, especially synth punk. Like, there are some really clashing synths on this album that I think sound really, really menacing and destructive. Next that I want to talk about here is Japanese House, something I did review recently that I was very late to, but this one kind of falls under more of the underrated umbrella, I think, rather than being overlooked. 'Cause it certainly got a bit of attention, but it seemed as though people were just kind of like, on this one. But I actually think it's really good. Again, I think it's just that kind of dream pop type stuff that appeals to me the most. I like her voice. The singer's voice is just so fantastic. It literally has one of the best songs of the year that I've heard here as well, with You Seem So Happy. I just think that song just... that song is just so addictive to me, man. I mean, sure, the back end of the album is kind of where the album starts to lose it a little bit, especially with my attention span. I kind of start to drift off. Some of the tracks aren't quite as strong, but I still think the first half, and even tracks like Lila, which fall into the second half, are still pretty fantastic. It's a band that I'm definitely hyped to see where they go from here, because this is a strong debut album with a few amazing tracks, but they definitely could improve upon this in future releases. They're still very, early on in the game. Definitely think there's more from them that we could be getting that's even better. If you're looking for some plunderphonics in 2019, another genre that people tend to really like, please check out this Plum album. It is very limited in terms of access. I don't think it's on Apple Music. I had to find it through Bandcamp, and I think it was, at the time, a free release, so you're not really going out of your way, financially to get this album heard. And the sampling on this album I found to be very creative. Again, it really is just your standard plunderphonics type stuff. There's a Post Malone sample at one point, I think, as well. I thought that part was a bit shaky and out of place. But the side A of the album was really fantastic, and I think it was side B that kind of dragged it down just a little bit, but even still, I think this is absolutely worth your time. Next, I want to talk about EarthGang. I thought EarthGang pulled out a pretty damn good hip-hop album this year. Not really been like head over heels so much hip-hop this year, I must admit. You've probably noticed on my channel too. There's even one time someone told me to stop reviewing hip-hop altogether because he was concerned with the lack of love that I have for the genre, but it's not true. I love hip-hop. I'm just not really wowed by everything that's coming out this year. And the one thing that dragged this album down instantly, which I knew was going to affect the hype for this album, because it got loads of hype to begin with, and now by the end of the year, people have really stopped talking about it, and that was the bloody Outkast comparisons. I thought the whole they're the next Outcast shit was just ridiculous and didn't help them at all. I'm just sick of this in hip-hop, especially hip-hop. You can't deny that it's something that happens in every genre, because it is just hip-hop, to be honest, where a new act comes around and it's like, oh, they're the next classic artist, they're the next Tupac, they're the next Biggie, This was another case of where it's like they can't just be judged independently without being compared to a very obvious classic artist that they are inspired by. They are very much inspired by Outkast, but they're not trying to be Outkast. And while lyrically I do think this is where the album kind of faltered a little bit, because the individual bars weren't exactly that impressive from the two guys here, I just found it to be a lot of fun. Like, I just didn't really need to pay attention to all of the ins and outs of what they were saying on every track, when they were just so good at having these animated, weird deliveries, like, similar to something like Young Thug. And then the hook game was really strong too. The beats were just pretty fun. Yeah, it's just an all-around fun project. I thought people would have been a bit more positive towards this, to be honest. A bit similar to Japanese house, though. By the second half of the album, it does start to wear thin a little bit, but still think there's some great tracks on here that I still have fun listening to. So yeah, if you haven't heard it already, I'd definitely check it out, and just try and ignore the whole Outkast thing, because they're trying to be their own act. They're from the South. They're obviously probably going to be influenced by many Southern artists, so just bear that in mind. And finally, for this video, obviously I've said there's going to be a second part, which I'll talk about some more albums later in the month. I'm going to go with 5K HD. This album, man, was just such a breath of fresh air in the art pop realm for me. Lyrically, this album was really interesting. I went really into detail with the themes on my review, so you probably want to check that review out rather than listening to me talk about it here, to be honest. I guess I could link all the reviews down in the description anyway. But yeah, this album just... I don't know, it just hit me in such an interesting way. Like, I found her voice to be very alluring. I thought musically it was very varied, creative and dynamic. Like, each track went for something different. There was some really weird twists and turns that some of the tracks went down as well. Like, there was this one moment where it goes really incredibly industrial. It was quite the quite the unique listen for 2019 for me. 10/15, easily one of the best pop songs I've heard all year, and the entire theme around this, worker who's constantly battling themselves in this awful state that they're in, which is how I interpreted the album. But I did want more people to check this out just to see if I had got anything wrong or anything like that, or to see how other people would interpret this album, because I definitely think it was quite ambiguous in that sense. So I think you could kind of take very different interpretations from this, and musically as well. It is just so damn friggin' good. So yeah, this is the first list for underrated and overlooked albums of the year. Definitely check out all of these albums if you haven't already. Tell me what you think is overlooked and underrated for 2019. Maybe I could listen to them and maybe I'll have a favourite of the year right before I do my actual list. So that'd be pretty cool. So hit me up in the comments, tell me what you think. Thank you for watching my review. Have a good day and goodbye.